Yo, what's up, everybody? Shawn from Automate to Win here. I was going through the computer, just looking through some things, and I found the conversation that the homie Hesh and I had a couple of months ago. We had this bug in our ass that we were gonna do a podcast or something while it's still at Speero. That didn't happen, obviously, but it was a good conversation, like an hour-long thing. We jump into the system that I built over at Speero that called XOS that he took into the product-led growth, leading the growth over at CXL. So it's a fun conversation. I think there's a lot of stuff to learn there. You can get kind of like an insight onto how those internal systems work and whatnot. Plus, it's just two guys that like genuinely like each other hanging out. So the vibe is dope. Yeah, man. Automate to win. Let's go.
I'm Hesh, head of product at CXL. This is Shawn David, systems engineer at Speero. We're here today to talk about how we're taking marketing experimentation frameworks and moving it from an agency framework to a product-led growth framework. So we're here to talk about that to see how experimentation can be a bit more of a holistic approach in a company rather than isolated to just websites. So to start this off, I'm going to ask Shawn why they set up an experimentation framework to begin with. Like, what was the problem you were trying to solve when you started this?
Well, the main problem is we had a bunch of different tools being used across a bunch of different clients, and we didn't really have a center of excellence, as they like to call it. We didn't have a singular source of truth, as it were. Had no place to really determine the calories being spent on experimentation. We didn't really have an ability to say, are we over or under serving our clients? We had a general idea of what we were doing on a day-to-day basis, but it wasn't a process, and there wasn't procedures there to actually track it. So the problem was we knew what our outputs and our inputs were, but we didn't really have a mechanism to make that work well. And then from there, we realized that all of these things can be automated to a point where we can save a bunch of time and a bunch of effort of just getting rid of the busy work.
All right. When you started to set up the solution, like, what were the first steps that you took? Like, how did you say, okay, like now we've identified the problem? What was the first step along that way?
The first thing that we did is we decided and crystallized the tool stack. So we looked at, okay, we're a Google company, but we're also in Airtable, and we're in Notion, we're in a bunch of different programs because of our clients. Now, our clients, we're tool agnostic, and that's one of our strong points. So our clients are in whatever our clients are in, and then we kind of work into their ecosystem. That's great for them, but it's really difficult for us, because if we don't have our definitional tools, if we don't say this is how we do things, we're always just fitting into our clients, and that works for them, and it worked for us for a long time, but that's not really scalable, because then you have to have pods of people that are skilled within certain tools. So you have like your Asana team, and they'll join a team, and now you become like tool dependent, and there's micro teams and a bunch of weirdness. So the first thing we did is we said, okay, our data layer is going to be Airtable, because I mean, get me off Airtable. I'm an Airtable fanboy. Then our task layer is going to be ClickUp. It's just picked the one that we wanted. ClickUp just seemed to be the best for what we wanted. And then our comms layer is going to be G Suite, and is going to be Slack. So that's our internal Speero stuff. We said, all right, here's the tools that we use. And then we got about working on our definition, our dictionary. So we said, doesn't matter what other people call it. Doesn't matter. It doesn't really affect us at all. If they call it X, that defines to us as Y. So if somebody has some kind of metric, they have KPIs, OKRs, all these different things, that's fine. You call them what you call them. And then that translates into what we call them, which allows us to onboard people into any client, which allows us to onboard new people into the systems, because we've defined what we call things. We've said, this is the tools we use. This is the way we build things. From there, we started doing SOPs. And then the SOPs started with automations. The waterfall started, but the first step was defining all of the things, laying that foundation out so we could start building on it.
Okay, so you decide on the tool set and then how to integrate those tool sets into the clients. And you mentioned Airtable being the data layer, so that's
Mm.
kind of where you operate mainly.
Yep.
Can you talk us perhaps through the setup there and how it, how it would differ from a normal framework? Like, how did you set that up?
Yeah. So basically, what we did is we just looked at how are these things entered? Like, what are the pain points of an experimentation program? And most of the time is because it's an ugly Excel sheet or a Google sheet or even an Airtable that it's like, okay, Pep's PXL at a 1 or a 0 or a 1.5 or a 2, and then come in here, and then the input system is just not good. The UX behind it was not good. The UI behind it is a spreadsheet. No one wants to use it. If you send that up to like a C-suite person and be like, here's our experimentation program, no matter how great it is, if you don't have something that they can look at and feel like they have control over and have it easy to do, they're just going to pass by, and then you don't get buy-in. So the easiest way to do that is give them something that's simple. So Airtable gives you forms. So what I did is I took that PXL and I actually took the questions for it. So instead of saying, is this above the fold? Yes or no, at a 1 or a 0. First of all, they may not even know what that is. So you create an Airtable form that allows the inputs to be easy. And it just literally says, what page is this on? Is this a high traffic page? Does this is this remove or add something to the page? Is it visible within 5 seconds? So what that does is it allows them to just say yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. It's a simple switch statement within Airtable that auto assigns numbers. At the end of it, it then goes and gives a PXL score, a prioritization score. So based upon all of these inputs, what's the score? One of the iterations that we did is we added a hippo coefficient because we learned that once these people start using it and they see their idea get translated into an actual experiment and then see results, especially if it wins, they want to do it more. So what we do is you add that hippo coefficient that may be like a 0.7 or 1.5. Every client is different. But at the end of after everything is done, it says, is this a political need? Like, is there someone here pushing this that needs to get put? And if it does, boom, now it gets added into that top list. It says, okay, here's the list of things that come from someone who signs the checks for this entire program. So obviously, let's see if we can fit this in. And here's all the ideas that come from everyone else. So you have like a sorting and then a sub sorting based upon the priority of the person. Now, is that the best way to do it? Absolutely not. But that allows for buy-in, that gives locus of control to the C-suite, that gives people like buy-in to the experimentation program, that allows money to be freed up. So it's like you're managing up automatically with the system. But from there, what we did is we built all that automation. So anytime that you enter in these systems, you click a button and the assets are created. The templates within the ClickUp are created. So your data layer informs your presentation layer, informs your task layer. So all you have to do is work within the data. It's not like I got to do something in Airtable and then I have to go and recreate it in G Suite and then I have to go and recreate it in ClickUp. None of that. If you create it in Airtable, it's then down the line created in everything else. So that's kind of like where we're at right now. We have that distribution from Airtable out, and we have about 50% of inputs that have already been created able to like actually change themselves. So that's the next version of all of this, is that two-way communication where you create the asset from the data layer and then the data layer is updated from the asset as the asset is done. That is like 50% done now, and that's like the next iteration of this.
So you first choose the tool set,
Yep.
then on your data layer, you basically used it as like the trigger point, right?
Yep.
So like you've converted a PXL or some prioritization mechanics and turned that into basically a UI where you feed the inputs with forms, where it's easy. And then from that, you trigger a bunch of automations to create the presentations or emails or, the communication layer and all that. So you don't have to, because that's where we're struggling now, is like, once you have an experiment, communicating it, creating the presentation, the test template, and so on.
Right.
So you've kind of automated all of that from your data layer.
Yep.
maybe I want to dive a little bit into the data layer a bit more, because I saw that you made a quite a clear distinction between the PXL framework, or like your hypothesis prioritization, and then you had a separate view altogether for experiments and research.
Yeah,
So maybe take us through first the difference between hypothesis and experiments in this framework,
sure.
and then we can address maybe the other ones.
Yeah, so we like to build it so that there's gates. So ideas are awesome, and we want to prioritize all the ideas. So you have levels of forms where it's just an observation. So if you work on a website anyway, or you just work at a company, like we want to you that idea, we want to be able to be sent into the prioritization framework. That may not be a hypo though. Like hypos are a very specific thing. Like you have to have a very specific mindset to be able to build hypos in a right way. You wouldn't expect someone who is just on a marketing team and has a lot of experience in marketing to fully understand hypothesis and scientific method. Right? You just wouldn't. Maybe they do. Fine. So what you do is you democratize it. So you don't force them to write a hypo. Like that's just not a good, like it's not a good way to get anyone to feel like they can input into the system, because then they're going to feel like I'm not a scientist. Like if then what, like it's just confusing. So you create the UX for them that allows them to say, all right, here's an idea, here's an observation. Like, what problem are we trying to solve? That's the question you ask. And then once you ask that question, they say, oh, well, I had this friction point when I was checking out. And they just write you a story. And then you say, and then the strategist behind it, then they go and they say, oh, okay, here is a level of prioritized ideas. From that, we can create hypotheses. Like we say, okay, this is an observation from this person. Let's do some research on this and find out what is going on. Oh, okay, there's whatever. There's an off ramp on the checkout, and then that's the reason that everyone is leaving, or an abandoning cart, or whatever it is. Like then your hypo is built from that, and then you have a substack of hypos that are prioritized. So you have this like massive layer of 10,000 ideas. And then from there, you can get a general prioritization if they use it, right? You can say, okay, let's just show me everything that is on this page. So I like as a strategist, you can come in and say, show me every single idea that is on the homepage or the checkout path or whatever metric you want. And then from there, you can start looking at observations, and you can say, okay, this is a big swing. Like this dude had this idea and this observation. I can create a hypo from that. So it's one of those things where you don't really know you need it until you have it. And then you're like, oh man, there's literally 10,000 ideas that come from this 70,000 employee company. And this form has been distributed throughout this entire company. And it's been very easily just like, it's a shortened URL where it's like dot, 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 dot. And then you can just go and fill out forms, and people use it, and it becomes a thing. And it's like, if you imagine however many people are in your company, if it's 10,000 people and you distribute this form that says, if you have an idea for our website or our product or our X, use this form and you can literally make it better. Then from there, like, and once they see that, like if you're a low level marketing person or you're a low level data analyst, low level is not the right word. Like if you're low seniority person and you have this idea and you kick it up, and you don't even have to go and pitch it to someone. You don't have to go and make sure, and you get credit for that idea. You're going to use it, and it's just a win-win for everyone. It's psychopositivity. Like your idea gets put into the pile. If it's a good idea, it gets experimented. If it wins, you're the person that had that winning experiment. You get that feeling. You're like, oh great, this is good, I want to do that more. It's off to the races, you know.
Yeah, that makes sense. Just kind of making it easy for people to get involved, right? So they don't have to navigate this whole thing. And am I assuming right that you have one or two or maybe a group of people managing this framework? Like how does the setup of operations work? Is it like, so one
Yep.
person steering the ship and people inputting, or
No, it's all
how
based on automations and pathing and systems. There's no real humans involved until you want to start building hypos or experiments. And I mean, if I got someone in here that was like, if we were willing to do like machine learning and algorithms, like we can actually build this out so that the best hypos are just put to the top. But as it is right now, it's the gates are opened and closed as they're done. So for instance, you could say only show me tests test ideas, like hypo ideas that are prioritized over 50% of like our coefficient, have come from C-suite and are on the homepage. And then from there, you're just like, okay, here is maybe that's 30 ideas. Like here is 30 ideas. 27 of them may be complete trash, and that's fine. That's usually how it works. But then there's 3 nuggets in there that it's like, oh, wait, this dude wants to remove search from the homepage. Like, let's go. You know what I mean? Like, there's real transformative test ideas that then you can get from. But none of that is through humans. None of that, like, no one's steering the ship there. That's all just data is there. It's manipulated by gates from the automations that are just from the inputs. So the thing is that people get trained. You don't have to enter in all this stuff. You don't have to prioritize it. You literally can just do observation, dump. That's probably never going to see the light of day though, because the other people are prioritizing it. They are filling out the full form. And it's like, okay, this is way easier for the strategist to take this and prioritize it. So if you have 10,000 records and 6,000 of them are prioritized and 4,000 of them aren't, what do you think is going to happen? You know, those 4,000 will never get sent. And when somebody comes and starts crying to you and they're like, hey, my idea was amazing. It was the best idea ever. It was a Trumpian idea. You just turn back and say, hey, you didn't fill out the form. Like, go back and prioritize it. And then that will get, if it is such a great idea, there's systems in place that will do that. And if that person is a C-suite person, then you say, okay, here you can have a system for that, and you add the coefficient, and then it gets to the top. So there's mechanisms there, but yeah, there's no real person. If there was a person there, that person would have a full-time job and it would suck.
Yeah, fair enough. And so you go kind of from ideas, and then you turn them into experiments, right?
Yep.
But not
Well,
every
hypos. Yeah,
well,
not every idea is a hypo, and not every hypo is an experiment.
okay, because sometimes you have research projects, right, which
Yep.
could initiate ideas, but they could also be resulting from an idea. So like,
Yeah. So for us, we don't experiment without research. Like, we'll do an AA just to make sure the tool works, or something that's completely obvious, just to get the reps in. But when we sign a contract with someone, you're looking at 6 weeks of research before we really even do anything. Like, this is what we found. This is what we feel is the path forward. Here's the variable set, and then you'll get a prioritized presentation at the end of it with like, whatever, here's 150 ideas prioritized from Git that we found from research, talking to your users and all this stuff. That is the first step of all of the XOS. Literally, like, our inputs are user testing. Winter's a huge one, obviously, because winter's dope. Just all levels of research input that you can imagine. Heuristics, moderated, unmoderated, user testing, everything you can imagine. And from there, that's where our initial ideation comes from. And that's where our initial hypos come from that research. And that's what would like build our roadmap. That's like, we sign a year contract, 6 weeks is research, and then you build out that roadmap from here. Okay, we're going to run this. That's when you start doing traffic analysis, doing TV, like test bandwidth, minimum detect. You start getting all these variables in place. That's how you can not have to worry about all of the stuff you're worried about, like the who's running this, like where do we look, how do we know if we're able to run experiments, how do we know what's our actual bandwidth, what can we do. That's how this goes. You look at all the data and you put it in, and you let the system be the bad guy. You let the system say, hey man, I don't know what to tell you, but your traffic, you came to me and you said your traffic is X. My traffic, like I literally need Y to even let this go. I don't know. Like, we let's just do research. You know what I mean? Like, let's pivot. Let's not even run an experimentation program because you can't. And it's just gonna fail. And the thing is, people will look at that and they'll be like, all right, cool, thanks for the honesty. Like, how do we get to that point? And then it's like, oh, easy. Let's do user research and let's figure out where the pain points are. Let's figure out how do we up the conversion from there. And then you can start running experiments because you actually have the ability to run.
yeah, that makes sense. So just as a quick wrap up for now. So first, before you even have the framework, you identified the problem, you chose your tool sets, you then set up the automation layer to make it easy to have presentation layers, communication, and so on. Then you have the input methods, so to make it easy for the people involved to actually use this system. So you've kind of made the complicated part, then simplified it, the UX, so people can easily adapt to it. And then when you go to a client, you're basically saying, okay, we're going to kick it off with some research to set off the cycle, right? It's like the beginning point of that cycle. And then it's just like, build, measure, learn, the usual.
That's it.
So that's it. So what did you learn from this whole process? Like, what were your biggest, like the top 3 learnings
Well,
you've
the
had?
top 3 is that every single client that we've gone to is in some sort of disarray and in their data layer. Like literally every single one, from Fortune 100 to people that just filled out the maturity audit. Like people don't even understand the tools that they use. So the biggest thing that I learned is like the most value that I can add to any client that I go to is what we try to do is, hey, just ask the question, what tools do you use? And then from there, it's amazing where you'll get sales uses this, marketing uses this, which is crazy that they're separate. And then advertising and marketing use different tools, which is again another layer of sales. And then you have your actual like building tools are completely different and they don't even really talk very well to your sales and acquisition and channeling tools. So it's like you're trying to get data from one silo to another silo, but the other, like the people themselves don't even speak. Like forget the tools, like the people don't speak. So the thing that I found is it is 100% more of a like a culture thing of, hey, you guys can talk to each other. It's okay. You own different KPIs, you own different OKRs, but if you work together, then it starts building cycle of positivity versus negativity. You're not chopping each other's feet so that other people can look right. And you may learn something about the people that you work with. So it's like what we found is once you start integrating the people, forget the tools, like the tools are irrelevant. It's all code. It's getting the people that say, okay, hey, you're not just the analyst down the road, or you're not just the developer who is like a pain point. You're John, or you're Sam, or you're, Raphael. Like once that happens, and it's like the whole you identify with people driving cars as not people but cars. Like if you remove that, the tool stuff goes away. And I entered this thinking I can automate my way out of this. I'm like, I'll just go into, no, it's definitely not. It's literally learning about the teams, learning about like the psychological problems and the conflicts between those teams, and then saying, oh, okay, we can fix that by automating these tools. So it's like a different flip on it. It's not like you can't just go in there and be like, what tools do you have? Okay, let me make them talk to each other, because that's just giving you shit faster. Like like that's just speeding up the garbage that you already have. And that's not going to help anybody. It really comes to being like, oh, okay, your sales force and your marketing team and your sales force and your acquisition team don't even talk to each other. Like you have 2 instances of Salesforce on 2 different teams. Why? And there literally is never an answer to why. There's never an answer. They're just like, oh, well, marketing set one up, and then our sales team set one up, and they're just different. And you're like, well, does that make sense? And they're just like, nope.
And that impacts the framework in terms of delivering the experiments, or how does it impact the framework, and how you employ it at an agency? You just find the friction is higher, or how does
Yeah,
that?
well, what I found is it actually, like, this system allows the culture to breed, because it literally gives you a singular point for everyone to input and to everyone to rail against. You know what I mean? Like it's amazing the way that humans work, because as soon as you give everyone like a singular place to bitch about, everyone like comes together. They're like, man, that system told me my idea was garbage. And then the other guy's like, yeah, I know. I put a system in the other day. I put a thing in the other day and it gave me like a score of 4. And I was like, that was a dope idea. And it's like a communal thing where like the robot is the bad guy. And it's not the PM or the strategist. It's literally the system that's telling you your idea is not so hot, buddy. Come back with a better one, you know? And
So it's not
that
really,
builds that out. It's interesting to see.
so you make it not really based on opinions, but like on the, I guess, on the key elements that go into the prioritization framework that then scores everything, and everybody kind of agrees on what that
Yep.
is. It's kind of in the same way like Scrum and sprints and stuff
Yeah.
works, right? It like kind of by having a framework, it kind of brings the issues and stuff to the top, and
Yeah, it
it's
removes
a
the
trans.
ego, you know what I mean? It removes the id and the ego. It allows you to communicate effectively about the idea and not about the person who had the idea or their role. You don't, there's no deference other than obviously the political one, which is not the best way to handle it, but it's the only way that we figured it out. You know, like this is required because the people that are signing the checks need to have buy-in, you know.
Okay.
So you got to defer to them sometimes, or to the position, not the person.
What would be your next steps then? Like taking this learning is, let's say that's the key learning. What would be your next steps to take this to the next phase? Like, how would you iterate on this?
The thing that we're really cracking our heads on is the automation of two ways. So right now, the problem that we're trying to solve is what happens after you've done that in the data layer. What happens in the Airtable? You've created your Google Doc or your Microsoft slide or whatever it is, or you have an asset, you have a thing, you have an idea, and you hit a button. Now you have a thing. The problem comes here is now the task layer updates the data layer, no problem, easy. You know, you do a thing and click up, it updates Airtable, fine. Asana, Jira, Notion, whatever, fine. The problem that we're running into now is it's a simple find and replace for your asset. So like you create a Google slide, it's a template. It has a simple structure that it finds a variable and replaces the variable from the data layer. Easy peasy. The problem that we're dealing with is that variable no longer exists because it's been replaced. So we have to kind of store the entire presentation in local memory and see if it's been changed, and then send it back into the Airtable. And it's clunky and it's a difficult thing to solve for. But once that's solved, then you never have to worry about ever reporting that you've done something. Like just doing the thing that you're supposed to do, like editing the deck or creating the deck, adding a slide to the deck, changing whatever, it then informs the data in the task layer. Conversely, if you do something in the task layer, it informs the presentation and the data layer. Right now, the data and the task are one-to-one, many-to-one connected. It's dope. It's fine. Airtable, ClickUp, Asana, they all talk to each other two ways, no issues. We're working on the presentation layer. Like we cracked that and this thing is basically done.
Yeah, so you have the sync between the tools, the task tools, and the data. Now you're trying to sync that presentation layer, so then
Yep.
it's completely in sync. Whenever something happens, it's just like everything is operating in the same thing. That would
Yep.
be your iteration. All right. Well, that I think that's yeah, that sounds very good. I think we've covered quite a lot of key stuff, and I think it gives quite a good overview of the XOS framework and what how you set it up, what you learned from it, and like where you're going next. For the next part, I think would be good if we kind of flip it and see what, because you shared this XOS with me, we're talking about it, and I was like, man, like, this has a lot of similarities between what we're doing. Like the principles are the same. Like you know, you start off with research, you're trying to find experiments to do, you're learning from them and iterating, and even down to the point where you're looking at goal tree maps and stuff. So we decided to kind of see if we can pivot that into a product discovery framework, right? So I think it would be really good if you if we go through this. You basically asked me the same questions.
Sure.
And I can show
So
you how
what I did is I built the system to run an experimentation program. And then you saw that and decided this would be a good way to pivot into product-led growth and basically use that for all of your ICPs and your central source of truth for what you do. Now, that's a completely different thing, right? Like, I mean, it's similar because it's data manipulation, but like what was the specific problem in your head that you had when you saw this and you said, hey, I can try to solve this?
Yeah, so the framework we had, like, it's based on the continuous product discovery framework. But like my problem was that this lacked weighting in certain areas. It was quite a manual approach, like you're on Miro board, you're doing your goal tree mapping. It relied heavily on interviews, which can be difficult to get consistency. There's like time issues there, bandwidth, and just recruitment issues. And the way you recorded the information, I found difficult to be able to outsource or get help on, because it's just like such a specific process
Mm.
that it was very difficult to democratize. It's like one person had to do it, and one person had to do it in a specific ways based on one research method.
Mm.
And that made it kind of slow and requiring dedicated effort. And it makes it kind of a side operation, right? Rather than like an integral way of how you work as a unit. So that's kind of the problem I was trying to solve, really.
And then, so basically you just took the experimentation program that we built and then adapted that, or did you change it?
So there's a huge overlap. I think it's good to like see the similarities between them first. Like that's where like my intrigue kind of pointed at it. I'm looking at it. It's like, okay, it's a marketing experimentation framework. There's some goal tree mapping, research, experimentation, learn, repeat. Loosely speaking, it's more or less the same.
Mm.
So what I did was kind of take that and be like, okay, well, we're not doing client-facing stuff. So like kind of removing that layer of client-facing from it and making it kind of adapting it to what we were doing. So we have a lot of user research that based on interviews, data analytics, feedback forms, feedback loop surveys, etc. And that gives us a kind of weighting of issues, right? So from that, we start with the goal tree mapping, and that's more or less the same, right? So you map out your objectives, let's say, then you identify the key research questions, and you take those and make research projects out of them. Like you mentioned earlier, that's where you start. You start with clients at that point, whether and it's kind of the same actually. We also use the research Excel. So heuristics, there's surveys, there's exit interviews, all of this type of stuff. And from there, you go back with that, because now it's collected also in Airtable. You have this kind of story. We call it the VOC hub, user research hub, whatever you call it. But you have kind of the common stories start to appear. And from there, you go back to the goal tree and you have a weighting now. So you can say, okay, well, we found that a lot of people want shorter content, or a lot of people are struggling with login issues or something like this. And that gives us like the prioritized, not ideas, but topic areas, the themes, from where you start going into ideation phase, which starts generating the ideas actually. And then you populate this list. And in the same way that you've set it up, we start getting back and like an automatic prioritization. We don't have to do it manually. And that makes it really easy for me, because I can just give somebody a form, be like, well, you're working on this topic area, the checkout. Can you just fill in like the ideas, and then it comes up, and then they get populated and prioritized for me. And then there's a couple of exercises from the product discovery, which I'm then reusing. I'm sure there's other ways of generating ideas and assumption mapping and stuff. And then that gives you this experiment generation. And this, like you mentioned as well, sometimes it's an experiment, sometimes it's an idea, sometimes it's a hypo. We try and do that for product. Obviously, we have an MVP mindset, so which is essentially then an experiment. So we're trying to take the smallest amount of effort and validate the biggest risk or assumption that we have. So we do a lot of assumption mapping. And from there, you get your experiment ideas. Again, they go into this framework and get prioritized for us, which is amazing. And yeah, like that's more or less how we've set it up. Like we're in that process of like merging the two frameworks. I think it's been quite not challenging, actually kind of fun to work out where the overlaps are. So like for me, it was just to map them both out and be like, what are these two frameworks doing that's the same?
Right.
And what are they doing that's different? And how are they different? To see whether it's worth keeping one or combining or separating. So that was for me kind of the process really.
And when, as you're going through this, did you start, what I found when I start building this is I started future mapping how this is going to get used. I started looking at it and I'm like, this isn't getting used right now, but it's gonna. Like, have you got to that point where you're just like, oh, this is gonna unlock the next thing?
Yeah, definitely. Because for me, like I mentioned, when the problem, it was like it felt like a one-man band doing the product discovery. I was just like, I had all the interviews, I had all the notes, I had all the opportunity mapping. Now it's really easy because, like you said, you can just make a form,
Yeah.
or like a UI interface on Airtable, or somebody that's doing some, like we have our CS agents, they're scraping stories from the chats. this is getting populated somewhere else. This just links in and feeds this pipeline. So yeah, you have to start mapping out how other people are going to interact with it, maybe productize it a little bit. Like you said, just improve the UX,
Yeah.
make it simple and less scientific. So I'm having to rejig it a little bit for this because there's like different inputs now. We have CS, we have marketing department, we have product, we have just bugs and issues that comes up. And sometimes solving a bug or a feature request requires an experiment.
Right.
It's not just about marketing. It's like, well, somebody has this problem and there's 5 different ways of solving this feature
Right.
request. Which one do we do?
Yeah, it's like, this is an edge case. Like, what do we do here? Yeah, for sure. So you're using it for, like we are too, like you're also using it for risk mitigation, which is to me one of the biggest, like, I don't know, found things that we've did. Like, yeah, we've used it, for hypo generation and all this stuff, but it's like, it really turns into guardrails and risk mitigation of people saying, we're not going to do bad ideas just because you think it's a good idea. Like for me, that was the biggest surprise, where once you get buy-in and the people, like, they're like, okay, we're playing the game, here's the rules, and they're like, I'm a player in the game. It doesn't matter who they are anymore. Like, they're just all players in that same game. So like when you say that the democratization, it's like, it really works, because then, yeah, you have the hippo coefficient, I get that, but that kind of proves the rule. Like, you have to have that because there's so many inputs that their voice would get lost. So I think now, have you had any issues with velocity problems? Like, I've gotten to a point where there's just, now it's a fire hose.
Yeah, so we started with that, but we like what? So we had to kind of, that really depends on your setup as a company, right? There's
Right.
different issues, like if you have low traffic, or like your team's not set up right, or there's processes that are getting in the way, or SOPs getting in the way. Like we kind of spotted that problem ahead of time. Thankfully, we kind of using Scrum and sprints to get into this routine of, okay, there's like a delivery schedule here,
Right.
and then you can, you can dedicate sprints to certain experiments, and I do see it ramping up. And like the nice thing to see now is that at the beginning, where it's like one experiment is taking like 3 sprints, because we're
Right.
identifying all of the issues in experiment generation or ideation or even green lighting or whatever it is that is doing it. And now we're at a point where I'm seeing the different tiers of experiments, because
Mhm.
not all product experiments have this like scientific approach, because
Right.
something might be like, we need this type of copy on a community post, like ship this like
Right. Get it out.
in 15
Right.
minutes it's done,
Yeah.
and then you monitor it.
Right.
And I am seeing like a distinct shift in that. So like above this XOS, we have an operational layer,
Right.
which is the speed part, right? So we're getting how to ship stuff quickly, the rhythm of shipping, like MVP, like there's all sorts of frameworks there, like Shape Up and stuff,
Right.
where they employ like the small and big bit. The small bit is like within 2 weeks, you ship it no matter what. If
Right.
it looks shitty at the end of the 2 weeks, you ship it
It is what it
anyway.
is. Send it.
It
Yeah.
is what it is. You ship it. So where I do see the velocity kind of lower is when you start looking at product and marketing experiments, because we're doing both on it right now.
Okay.
So like we have product experiments, but also marketing experiments on top. And when there's an overlap, you see it just suddenly slow down a little bit.
Right.
And that's where like, okay, there's more stakeholders, and there's tech issues, there's
Yeah.
measurement issues, data issues.
There's a lot of cooks in that kitchen.
Yeah, exactly. So that's where I would say and sometimes it's just a traffic problem. We don't have enough traffic to run all of these tests. So like, how can you queue up more tests? And that's where the like the goal tree on this framework for me is like, for me, that's the home view, not not the list view or the spreadsheet view or whatever. That to me is the home view. You can see what the objectives are in the company right now, what's happening, what's queued up, like, and you can then separate experiments, and it gets a bit easier to like remove conflict from experiments. You're
Yeah.
like, okay, well, like we're testing something in community now, it has no impact on checkout.
Right.
They're just 2 separate things. So
Yeah.
instead of like, you can look at it in terms of like doing things in parallel, and it makes it really easy to see. And
Yeah. And you can
actually
start seeing lopsided really easy.
yeah. So I even discovered that like some experiments may have a negative impact. So you just, you tweak the Airtable, and you just have another sub list on that object tree where it shows you, well, this experiment running over here could potentially
Yeah, fuck
negatively
this one up.
impact your
Yeah,
like your revenue. So like,
yeah.
spot it like this.
Yeah, it's super. I mean, it's super customizable is not the right word because it's not really it's like it's just buildable. It's like XOS is in and of itself kind of just like a mindset. It's kind of just like identify your tool set, identify how they need to talk to each other, and identify what you actually need, inputs and outputs. And then XOS is just the mechanisms to get that. It seems simple, but it's just crazy.
I guess that's what I really liked about it, is that I immediately saw the relevance to what I'm doing. It wasn't this like super scoped down, well, this is a framework that only does website experimentation. I immediately saw the overlap of what I was doing, and effectively being able to very easily get it to this point. Like, I haven't put more than like maybe 16 hours into this, and
Oh,
now the
nice.
result is something that works for both. Like, I'm sure issues will pop up, but then you iterate on them, right? Like, for me, that's kind of where we're at now, spotting the problems between this and seeing what to do about them next.
So that's a good segue to the next question of what's next. What do you do?
For me, like, yeah, I think the biggest part is getting people more involved in it. Like, people are working disparately now. Some people are in ClickUp, some people are doing their research project in Docs or Google Sheets, some people are doing meta-based questions. How do you, again, maybe similar to you actually, like, how do you automate or ritualize the input that everything starts living in one place? For me, that's like now herding the cats. Like, we have it, I know it works. Now it's like herding the cats and pushing people to using it, and then using it effectively, because I've validated myself that it works. But now the inputs, the presentations, they all have to come and live here now. So
Right.
maybe it's something that you like, I would kind of ask you, like, how did you go about that process?
Still working on it.
Yeah.
Now what I'm trying to say is, like, how much buy-in do you have? Like, where are you at?
With this framework, you mean?
Yeah.
The buy-in's there, to be honest. Like we have, obviously at CXL, like with Pep and Merit,
Right.
they live experimentation, right? Like, we don't really have that problem. But
Right.
having talked to a lot of people recently, also at CXL Live and stuff, almost every conversation pivoted to that
Yeah.
buy-in. How do you get buy-in? And you get that problem sometimes with product, because you're trying to select, well, this is the feature that we're going to build, or
Yeah.
this is the test to validate the feature we're going to build. And honestly, having that tree map, being very easily being able to visualize why you're doing something, where is it hitting, what does it impact, makes the conversation much easier. It doesn't solve the conversation, obviously.
Nice. Yeah, it can be a difficult conversation when you go and tell somebody that, hey, all of these activities that we're working on are not moving the needle. They're like, why not? Like, I'm not sure, but it's not, like, we're working on it. Yeah, it's sometimes scary. Like, have you run into any issues of people? It's difficult, but like, I found that sometimes this will expose people who are, for lack of a better term, not really putting forth the effort that they like. In experimentation, you're only as good as like your last idea, right? So I've found that especially people that have been doing it for a long time of getting kind of complacent in the systems, that their ideas are very like specific to their KPI, specific to their OKR. So I don't know necessarily how to solve. Like, what I'm wondering is, how do we get the democratization to work, but not get it to a point where it just becomes rote, and now it's like XOS is just the next button test tool.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah, yeah, it's a good phrasing of the question. Like, what did highlight for me, rather than like the lack of effort, is a slight fear around the idea of
Yeah.
experimentation. It's like everything is really difficult to set up, because they
Right.
see one experiment being complicated or long, or like requiring time to execute. It puts this idea in your head that an experiment can take a very long time to execute, when,
Right.
like we mentioned earlier, this could be like 30 minutes and you're out the door.
Right.
And you have the mechanism, the recording, the measurement plan, everything in place. This allows you to do that in a very effective way, because it removes operational boredom out of it. Like the grind becomes not there. So I just got to fill in this form, idea done. Here are the metrics. Here's what it's impacting, bam, done. And it's out the door. I've done the post. I put this social media post out there with this type of image trying to like attack this psychological thing. And or in the community, it's like we want people to get involved. This is what we did. This is what we're trying to achieve. And it takes that out of it. And I think there's a certain amount of leading by example as well. Like you need to find those people that will take it and run with it, run an experiment in an hour, or identify who they are already and like, well, look at look at Tracy. She's running like 20 experiments at the same time. Look how she's set up. She's tackling this objective, that objective, that objective, that objective.
Yeah, that's dope, because then you're just showing them. You're not like, hey, you're not doing this. You're like, look what is possible. Yeah, and then
look what's possible, rather than like looking at the default. Like look at like, again, what you mentioned earlier, this like cycle of positivity. Like this idea was great. It took 10 minutes to set up, and it moved the needle by 1, 2, 3%.
Yeah,
that's
how I try to do it too. It's just it's just so it's what I find funny too is like once you start really automating stuff, people immediately just start getting very lazy. Like things that they would just do for the rest, like their entire, they've been doing it for 10 years, no problem. And then you're just like, hey, you don't have to do that. And now all of a sudden, wait, what else don't I have to do? So it's interesting because you could get kind of crazy with it, and then go off and hey, automate this thing, and I don't want to do any work.
Yeah, but then maybe the emphasis goes on certain parts, right? So like in the continuous product discovery framework, a lot goes into the opportunity mapping and the go-to mapping side of things. Like iterating on that is like where you spend or should be spending the most work. But in reality, when you're trying to execute, you end up trying to recruit people for interviews and transcribing them into stories. But like if you automate or make that part easier, which we've managed to do, now it's like, well, okay, like why don't you just spend more time making sure the experiments are aligned with the objectives?
Have you looked at just listening to what you said, have you looked at AI dumping into Airtable from the video?
AI dumping from video?
Yeah, so basically they just listen to the video and you just get the text into Airtable.
Yeah, it's something like that we're doing now. So we're doing it with the chats and the video, and then we run like an ngram script on top that just like looks at the common phrases, which then tags it, and then that doesn't do all of the work, but it removes like an 80% burden of like we have all of this content. What do we do? Okay, it's bucketed into these like 40 or 50 themes. We can remove these. Okay, they're talking about this mini degree, or shit, everybody's talking about our navigation. Maybe we should do an investigation there. So it helps us get out the door really quick in terms of what to look at.
Yeah, so I mean, the long story short here, I think the XOS is a frame. Like, it's just literally just a mindset to make things go literally as fast as possible.
Yeah.
Right. It's just as whatever you can do to just make it warp speed.
Indeed. And like, what advice would you have? Like, just maybe to wrap up, what advice would you have for somebody that's setting up something like this, whether it's XOS or different? Because, like, just as a wrap up, like, all you really did was take a prioritization framework, convert it to an Airtable, make it simple for people to use and automate.
That's, I mean, it's not hard. Any engineer is going to do that, right? Like, that's what I try to tell anyone. Like, any engineer put in my position would build this. It's because this is just what you build. So, but it's just no one did because the advice is think like an engineer and think of how to problem solve, and not this is how I did it before. Like, channel Elon Musk. Like, it doesn't have to be this way. Like, just because there's non-electric cars, we can have electric cars. Just because we didn't go to Mars before, we can go to Mars. Like him or hate him, that's how the guy thinks. So that's what you have to do as an engineer. You have to say, just because you did it this way before, it doesn't mean it has to be done that way. And then you just keep building until the way that you see in your head or someone else's head is there. So then the old way is no longer the way because you've built a new way. And there's never a new way until someone builds it. So the only advice I would have is figure out the inputs that you have and the outputs that you want. And then that's the problem to solve. How do I get this input reliably to this output? That's it. What that is in the middle of it, that's irrelevant, really. That's just the tools. Okay, use Airtable, use Google Sheets, use whatever. It's your brain. Like, you're the person that sits there. So if you're spinning this up, that's literally it. Look at the people, talk to the people that are actually using this thing. Like, what don't you like about this process? Like, what is it that causes problems? What do you have to do on a regular basis that you don't feel you should have to do? Like, what is that? And then once you figure that out, you got a whole list of inputs, and you say, okay, these people, this is what we have. And then you say, all right, great, what do we want at the end of it? And then you say, this is the conveyor belt. And you say, okay, I can build a robot here, there has to be a human here, there has to be a, okay, this is an automation, this is a script. And then eventually you start pulling the humans out, and you say, okay, this human doesn't have to be here. There's a gate here. This could be an automation. This could be an automation. And eventually you just have a conveyor belt that a human starts and a human ends, and the robots take everything in the middle. So you get rid of all of the admin work, but that starts with inputs and outputs. And if you don't know what those are, you don't know what you call them, you don't know how they work, all you're doing is just speeding up garbage.
Indeed. All right. Well, Shawn, thank you for all of that. I think it was, I think, yeah, we have, yeah, quite a lot.
Full hour, ready to go.
Yeah, full hour on this, and I think there's plenty here to get stuck into. Yeah, it was really a pleasure talking to you about this.
Of course.
And maybe we can